Revolution of common sense.
Revolution of common sense.
A revolution of common sense.
Truth was once common sense, but today, truth is uncommon. Explore biblical truths around faith, business, and politics with Peter Demos. Uncommon sense in current times.
Hey folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. I'm here today with Greg Koukl. I am so excited. I've never met Greg before, but I've always felt like he's part of my family. When my children were a couple years before going to college, I realized we taught them the dangers of sex, alcohol, drugs, but we did not teach them how to defend their faith. So we started trying to find ways of which we could kind of introduce them to different levels of apologetics that was more practical in nature, not just some theoretical ideas and theoretical constructs that was a little above their head. And one of the many tools that we found, and one of the great tools we found was Greg Koukl's Stand to Reason podcast. We read his books. We did a study on his book Tactics in particular. And there was just so much there because he doesn't use these 4 and 5 syllable words to express something that is just really simple and easy to comprehend. And so I highly recommend that you follow him in that way. So Greg, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. I greatly appreciate you being here.
Well, it's a real treat for me, Peter. And I actually spent a lot of money to learn those 4 or 5 syllable words. But as it turns out, that helps me to understand them and then try to translate them for the common person. And that's a big part of what Stand to Reason is about, taking these harder concepts that are really important to understand in our culture to defend the faith, stand for Christ, and then to translate them so that they're accessible to the rank and file. And this is what I try to do in the podcast and also my writing.
I will say it's so easy in listening to you over and over again to be able to apply it without feeling that fear of having to do it. It's not like you're encouraging everyone to go out with a pamphlet and do this and then be expected to have people to come and ask you all these questions that you can't answer, and all of a sudden you got to become an expert of the rapture and tribulation. Like, you make it simple for us. Did that come all of a sudden? I'm just curious, or is that a process that you kind of learned with time?
No, it didn't come all of a sudden. I've been a Christian now pushing 52 years. I became a believer in 1973 at 23 years old. I understand you became a Christian as an adult as well.
Yes,
and
I did.
Puts us at an advantage and a disadvantage. We have a lot of history that's not so pretty, but at the same time, we understand the world much better than someone probably raised in the church. And after I became a Christian, this is right in the middle of the Jesus movement in Southern California. I'm going to UCLA. The first church I walked into as a new Christian was Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And it was a concert on Friday night as part of this explosion of Jesus interest here in Southern California and then around the nation, called the Jesus movement. Some people maybe have seen the movie. And of course, I just adopted all of the patterns of the time, sharing my faith because I was just overflowing with excitement about Jesus. And a lot of times when you do that, you end up spreading more heat than light. You know how that works, especially for somebody that's fairly aggressive like I was. And not only that, there's a certain style that we learned that is continued for 50 years. And it's kind of like give the simple gospel, challenge them to receive Christ. Close the deal, and this gets more into the tactical concerns in the other book. But I found out that, that worked 50 years ago. It's not so good now because the world has changed radically. And my emphasis now is not on harvesting. I don't even care about the harvest. I know that sounds so weird to say that, but here's the reason why. Unless you have a season of gardening in a person's life, you're not going to have any harvest. No duh. Okay. And so what I focus in on is gardening. And then the harvest, I promise you, the harvest takes care of itself. When I poll audiences, when I'm teaching, say, on the tactical game plan from the book Tactics, I take a poll and I said, how many people here who are Christians actually came to Christ through praying with someone to receive Christ, kind of that old standard, or maybe coming forward at an altar call, also a Jesus movement standard, MD for that. The average in the Christian audience, whether it's 500 or 3,000, is 75% did not come to Christ that way. They almost always came to Christ on their own, having others influence them to bring them to the point, but the touch point was by themselves with the Lord. And some don't even remember their spiritual birthday. So the point I'm making here is that, and this is what I've really emphasized in answer to your question, is going slower, being calmer, being more friendly, asking lots of questions with the goal of just leaving a stone in their shoe, is the way I put it. Gardening, gardening, gardening. Because I know that God is, when that reaches maturation by the role of the Holy Spirit in their life, God is going to bring the harvest in however he wants. And a lot of times it's not by some Christian forcing them, pressuring them, let's put it that way,
Right.
to pray to receive Christ.
So I want to switch to your book, the story of reality,
Sure.
and I want to start with a tactics question for you. What do you mean? What do you mean by reality? Like, and if so, not only, and why does it matter?
Mm-hmm. I have this is a great question, and it's central to my own project, not just with a book, but with Christianity, because it is very, very easy for people to relativize our statements about Christ and God, etc. In other words, okay, well, that's your thing, that's your religion. In fact, when even in Christian circles, I just heard it yesterday on the radio. Well, it's the life of faith. Tell us about your life of faith and how faith has really helped you. I'm going to tell you something, Peter. Faith has not done a thing for me. Jesus has done all the work in my life, not my faith. And so notice how when you talk about faith, that is the subjective side. That's what I have and I'm doing. And this is what people want to say. Some Christian gets lost in the woods for 5 days. Oh, his faith saved him. His faith didn't save him. God saved him. But they don't put it that way because God is outside of us, objective reality. Faith is the inside subjective thing. And it's easy for people to talk about that like it's a spiritual fantasy, and that's fine. You're welcome to your fantasy. And that's the way they see religion. And so when I wanted to carefully explain the Christian understanding of the world, I used the word reality because what Christianity is a picture of reality. In fact, every religion is intended to be that, is to tell you how the world actually is. But that's been lost in recent times, ever since the Enlightenment, really. But especially in the last 50 years, that's just you're welcome to your fantasy. I just want people to understand that we aren't talking about our fantasy. We are making claims about the nature of the world. And so when I say Christianity is true, I mean true like when I say gravity is true. It's true to the world itself. It's the part of the structure of reality. Now, we need to defend that, obviously, but I don't want people to be confused about the kind of claim we're making. And not only is the world confused, but massive numbers of Christians are confused as well. So that's what informed the title of the book, The Story of Reality.
So when you reference it as faith, and I've always kind of chuckled because I have faith that we were going to connect through Zoom, that I could see.
Right.
I don't understand how it works. So it has to be faith. I know that somewhere it goes up to satellites, comes down. So I know there's a faith component into this.
Sure.
But it is not something that is something I'm going to be worshiping now.
And it's not frivolous either. It's not a leap of faith in the way that people think of it.
Right. So from that sense, do you think we use faith the way that you were talking about it as a means of softening it? Because so therefore we don't have to be put in a position to defend our belief in God or to defend or feel like we have to defend God himself. Is there something there involved in that?
Well, I think it's not so much softening. That wouldn't be my take on it. I think it's just a habit. And the habit 50 years ago had expressed a different set of concepts or content than it does now, because so much of religious views have been relativized now. Oh, that's your view. Everybody else has their view, and that's all you could say about it. Okay. And so I'll just tell you something, Peter, and you know this from reading the Tactics book. I don't use the word faith anymore because I think that word has been so corrupted to communicate anything meaningful about our own, watch this word, convictions All right. I tell people, I want people not to put their faith in Jesus. I want them to put their trust in Jesus. Now, that's what the word means. The Greek
Right.
word that was translated faith, pisteo, that's what it means. And so, this applies to your comment earlier about the Zoom meeting. Okay, you you put your trust in the Zoom product, and you had good reason to believe it will do what it was intended to do. You had contacted me. I had the Zoom address. You have the equipment. You've done this before. Bada boom, and here we are. Okay, so your trust was justified based on the information that you had. It's exactly the same thing when we talk about our spiritual convictions. We have reason to put our trust in Jesus because of the evidences that show that he's trustworthy. Now, a lot of people don't know all the evidences, and that's just a part of the process as you learn. And this is what Stand to Reason is meant to help provide for the rank and file Christian. But the fact is, it can be defended that way. It is not just a leap of faith. It is actually a step of justified trust. And when people take that step of trust for whatever reason, Jesus meets them. Even if this is the first time you use Zoom, Peter, you say, I don't know if this sucker works. I'm going to push the buttons and put the thing in it. Oh my goodness, there he is. There's Koukl. So you see, okay, you got the result that verified verified your trust in the product. It worked. It works the exact same way, or is meant to be understood the same way in terms of our relationship with Christ and our convictions about. I even avoid the word beliefs because that also can be, although it is a belief, but it can be relativized. So our convictions about God, and I think I think we just are in the habit of talking about it this way, and culture talks about it this way to focus on the individual experience instead of the external thing that we're being involved with. All right, and that's why I think those words are not very useful anymore, and it'd be better if we just changed our vocabulary a little bit to using trust and convictions instead of faith and faith to describe our act of faith or the content of our faith.
I'm always I love the book of James, particularly when I'm going through troubles. And in James 2, he says even the demons believe and they shudder.
Right.
So it could be a story of reality. I can believe this to be true, but again, it kind of goes back to that. So what? I mean, we don't even shudder anymore, especially here. Like we may believe in God, but we don't. And now I'm sure that when Jesus shows up right now, you and I both would be on our ground pretty quick. But it does seem to be that belief is this kind of like the belief in versus the belief of or belief that? I mean, where does that kind of fall into relation to this? Because I can believe this reality that you're talking about, but if it doesn't have an impact in my life, what difference does that make?
Yeah, this is a great distinction, and I do talk about this in the story of reality because the distortion of the word faith, and I make a distinction between, as you put it, belief that and belief in. So here's a good illustration. A couple of weeks, I'm going to get on a plane and fly to Nashville, actually, and do an event there. So maybe you'll be there. I don't know. We'll meet. But I have all kinds of convictions about Delta, and the airplane and the pilot and all that other stuff. I am fully confident that Delta is able to do that work for me and get me from LAX to Nashville. But I don't exercise trust in that until I climb on the airplane. And when I climb on the airplane, then I'm all in. Then I'm at the mercy of the plane and the pilot and everything else, So there's the distinction. There's all kinds of people, and we were talking about this a little bit off the air a few moments ago, who have all kinds. In fact, I think this is part of your own life, your own story, who have beliefs that Jesus, this, that, and the other thing, and believe that God, whatever. But they don't have but they're not trust in the transformative sense. So it doesn't affect the behavior or the issues of your life. Now, you might go to church. I mean, that's a behavior, but it's just part of the activity that Christians do to be Christian. And of course, that's not what God's looking for. He's looking for the transformation, the friendship that I talk about in the story of reality, and that comes as a result of the new birth. But that's not going to happen until we put our trust in. And by the way, there's lots of people listening, and you're an example of this, who know they've trafficked with Christianity for maybe a long season before they put their trust in, and that changed everything. And now you have a foundation to build that awesome fear of God. And that, by the way, that's a process too. That comes over time. Some people get it right away, like they're on their face. Other people feeling close to God and being aware of his presence, that just takes time. But at least you're on the journey, the proper journey. Doing religion is not the journey. It is not what God wants. And there are plenty of places in Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, where this is made clear. I do not desire sacrifice. Well, that's in the law. That's not what they're supposed to do. No, it's the broken heart that I want.
So I guess then, for me, because again, you're right, I did grow up in church. I was actually very antagonistic toward Christians. I read the transcripts of the Scopes Monkey trial to see what Clarence Darrow used against William Jennings Bryan. So it wasn't just I was kind of around it, et cetera. But again, I grew up in it. My parents did what they knew to do, but it just really honestly wasn't enough for a skeptic like me.
Yeah, that trial actually happened right near where you lived. Just a little south
really,
of where you
not
live.
too far from here. Yeah, a few hours from here actually. And so, but why is it again being exposed to the reality? But I still chose to believe a lie, and so many others choose to believe a lie. Why do you think that's the case? Because all throughout history we see it. I mean, we see the exposure even in the Old Testament, the clear indication even in the Exodus. But they still chose to believe a lie.
It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, pillar of fire, the whole deal, and they still go crazy. I think, John talks about three enemies: the world, the flesh, and the devil. Okay. Now, the world and the devil are external, but the flesh is internal. And so there's a cooperative relationship there. Now, even as Christians, those are factors that we have to be careful of. We're in opposition to those. But when you're not a Christian, you're not in opposition to those. I remember a guy, a pastor once I interviewed, and he said, before I was a Christian, I never, how did he put it? It's like I never had to deal with, how did he put it, temptation or something? Like he always gave in. It was like it was never a struggle because he was worldly. So and I think that's it. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul talks about those who are not lovers of the truth. They are not lovers of the truth, and consequently they're deceived. And this is the way you and I were. We weren't lovers of the truth. We are lovers of ourselves. And therefore, we just embraced everything that satisfied us, not satisfied God. And it took a supernatural intervention by God to overcome that blindness in our lives and help us to see what the truth is so that we could embrace it. And that of course, changed everything, didn't it?
So, but even on that same token, I still see it. And again, let's look at the parable of the sower. There's those that deal with worry and they fall away. There's those that deal with riches, or the desire for riches, I should say, and the cares of the world, and they fall away as well.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me, and my pastor has to remind me all the time. Every time I say "can't you see," it means they can't. And so
that's right.
I mean, like, can't you see this? It's so obvious. But he's like, yeah, that means they can't. Is it because they get blinded by it, or because do you think it's part of that free will actively choosing, I want both?
Well, I think both are true. I think there is a blindness, and then what people do is they choose what is consistent with their desires, that is informed by their blindness. So both are factors there, and the gospel is foolishness to the unbeliever. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 2. It's not foolishness. Sometimes when people play that, Paul says the gospel is foolishness. No, to those who are perishing, it's foolishness. But it's the wisdom of God. And of course, when we as believers, we begin to unpack that. And this is a big part of what the story of reality is meant to do. We realize it's not foolish at all. It's brilliant. There's a cohesiveness to the story from the beginning to the end. It all fits together and it's elegant. And part of the reason I wrote the story of reality is so that non-believers can see this elegance, and the elegance itself is going to have I think, a persuasive role. I remember seeing a little clip. I can't remember what it was. It was on YouTube, and it was some atheists talking together, and they were saying Jesus being the only way. That's ridiculous. It's not even worth thinking about. Well, that's because they don't understand the big picture. That's like saying chemotherapy being the only. Well, that's ridiculous. Well, when you understand how cancer works and you realize what some types of cancer entail, then it makes sense that there can be an only medicine for that particular ailment. But they have no understanding. They didn't put it all together. It just sounds like arrogant Christians, and so they're completely dismissive of it. But understanding how it fits in the larger picture, which is the goal of the story of reality, which, by the way, the subtitle is How the World Began, How It Ends, and Everything Important That Happens in Between. When you understand that, all of these pieces fall into place, and at least they're coherent now. Whether one embraces that as the true characterization of reality, that's another matter. And the question you're asking is a complex one because it has to do with the nature of fallenness, biblical anthropology. What are human beings like? Well, they're made in the image of God, but they're broken. They're beautiful, but they're broken. And this brokenness is the foundation for the rebellion and the I don't want God kind of thing. I want what I want. And then you got the Holy Spirit working in some measure, and different theologies are going to cash that out in different ways. But it's a complex mixture of things. And one of the things that I appreciate about Scripture is that when I read what it says, it comports with my deepest intuitions about the way I am as a human being and the way the world is, which is just another way of saying that these are touchstones of truth.
I look at Psalm 73. It's one of my where he says, I almost fell because I saw the prosperity of the wicked, and I'm paraphrasing that.
And I just read it the other night, by the way.
Did you?
Yeah, I did, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
I feel that still. I feel that at times, where I'm looking around and, as a Christian, you think, oh, everything's going to be good. And I always tell people, if anybody ever says that, you run away from them. Like
that's right.
It's so not true. But you look around at all these people that are evil and wicked, and they seem to be so successful. Now, whether they are or not, again, according to Facebook, they look incredible. They got the perfect beach picture. So, they have to be a happy family,
Mm-hmm.
But you see this and you're making this comparison, and then there's that you're allowing that temptation to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Where does this fall into this story of reality, and what can we do to help us from allowing that seed to take root in our lives?
Yeah, well, remember the story of reality is how the world began and how it ends. All right. So you have to see the big picture. And this is really helpful to me right now. I'm almost 75 years old, and there are all kinds of things on my bucket list that have not been satisfied yet. And some of them are really important, and I'm never going to get to them. But I think a lot of people in my circumstance, apart from the Lord, in the world, they're thinking, oh, my life didn't turn out the way I want it to be. What a disappointment. So this is a sad situation. Not everybody, but many. But see, I know that this isn't the end, that this 70 right now that I'm living is just the beginning. And it's like, if you think about retirement, all right, so you work all your life really hard. That's hard. And then you put stuff in your 401k, then you retire and you get to benefit from the 401k. All right, great. It's kind of like that. That's a good analog. So our whole life is that work, and we're putting up deposits in our eternal 401k to benefit from, which is why Jesus said, do not lay up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. Put it where it can't be taken away from you. And so I think that for me, I understand that this whole life is a training period. J.P. Moreland, one of my mentors, the philosopher, said that this life, God is training us to be fit to spend eternity with Him. And Paul makes a comment in 1 Timothy, I think 4, he says, 1 Timothy, he says, but physical exercise profits a little, but godliness is a means of great gain. For it holds a promise not just for this life, there's a payoff here for now, but also for the life to come. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the famous passage that C.S. Lewis wrote a piece on, a well-known piece, he says, for momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory. So it's those, I try to keep the big picture in balance when I face the hardships in my own life. And they're manifest. I mean, any person who's walking with Christ, and I'm glad that you said that, Peter, because the Jesus movement had a different perspective. Yeah, become a Christian, solve all your problems, get your kids off drugs, fix your marriage. That isn't the way it works. And so having a realistic understanding that it's a battle through life, then we are not caught by surprise by these bad things that happen, but we are cooperating with God as He purposefully uses those hard things in our lives to make us more like Christ. Now that's a Romans 8, we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Now, the verse keeps going, and a lot of people stop there. For those whom He foreknew, He predestined to become conformed to the image of His Son. So the whole process of God doing good in our life through the hardship is to make us more like Jesus. And we take that into eternity and enjoy it forever.
Hey folks, thank you so much for listening to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. We've enjoyed this conversation with Greg Koukl so much that we've decided to extend it and have 2 parts to this. So stay tuned and listen to the next episode that'll be coming up with Christian apologist Greg Koukl.